taken items from the camp.
I was muted. What? Could you hear me? Yeah, all right. How did you know that? Oh, okay, technology, eh? So it's also interesting for us, not just what's going on this campus, but what we're doing on our other campus now, which is over at Tyseley. Can people hear now? Over at Tyseley, so we have just opened our Birmingham Energy Innovation Centre, the link into the refueling station there, great partnership with Webster and Horsfall, and great things happening in that part of Birmingham. And being able to tie together what we're doing on campus and what we're doing across the city, and hoping and helping to shape and influence what's happening around net zero is the way that the university can contribute to the wider city. So, welcome. And with that, I'm going to hand over to our chair, Councillor Zafar.
Good evening, friends. Can I first and foremost thank Martin and the team here at the University of Birmingham for hosting this community assembly here today. And it's so good to be here in person, and also, well, we're in hybrid mode, aren't we? And I think this is the future, where we've got some folk here in the room with us, and we've got, I think it's 34 who are joining us remotely too. So it's fantastic to see you all here for this community assembly. Martin and the team at the university are working hand in glove with the council on a number of projects. He mentioned Tyseley Energy Park. And I know Mr. Horsfall's here too. It's an exciting development. It's something that's going to grow and grow. And I think one of the things we've been lacking is really celebrating what's happening there at Tyseley Energy Park. So I hope to be down very, very soon. I know you had a fantastic event yesterday where the Lord Mayor attended, the local MP for Yardley attended there too, and Councillor Zafar Iqbal, who's the Zafar that gets everything right. That's what he keeps reminding me. He was pulling that together with the university and other colleagues at Tyseley Energy Park. I've been instructed by Ellie to go through some housekeepings. I want to say a big thank you to Ellie, to Karen, to Amit, and the team at the university and the council who pulled this together. This is a new way of doing things. It's the first time we're recording a hybrid community assembly. Not sure what it's going to look like to those that are watching later on, but it's important that we record what's happening. So I just want to say, colleagues who are on the hybrid mode, if you can stay on mute until you get into your sessions. We've got some discussions coming up where we want you to contribute. There will be an opportunity for us here in this room to have some group discussions, and those on the Teams meeting will also be able to have some discussions. So this is the second community assembly after launching the action plan earlier this year. The first one, I'm going to be honest with you, it was a bit of a talking shop, and I did not feel comfortable. It was difficult to talk with 100 people in a remote room. So we thought it was really important that we created an opportunity for people to come and talk to us and engage with us in person, those that can, but also have those in hybrid format too. But hopefully we'll get an opportunity where we can start talking about some of the key issues that we've been working on. We've had a slight name change for this. This is the Route to Zero Community Assembly. There was we're getting the odd tweet now and again, which was referencing us as the UK Climate Assembly. So we just wanted to clarify things. We're not quite at that level yet. Birmingham is the second city. We're going places. We've got some ambitious plans. We're not quite there where we're leading on behalf of the UK. And please do, if there's anything that you want to bring up, like you brought up earlier, you couldn't hear Martin because he was on mute. So do use the chat function to communicate with us. Now what I'm going to do is, I'm a big football fan. And when the Villa sign a massive player, they unveil this player in front of a huge gathering, and you're all going to get your phones out and you're going to picture this major announcement, because Man City might have taken our £100 million captain away from us, but we at Birmingham City Council have also made a record-breaking undisclosed signing. That's what we're calling it. So when football clubs sign a player that they don't really want to tell people how much they've paid the other club, they call it undisclosed. So that's what we're going to do. So we made a commitment that we're going to set up a climate change team when we launch the action plan in January. So we're working hard in pulling together, starting to pull together a team. But every team needs a captain. So in the past few weeks, we've appointed the Assistant Director of Climate Change, who's going to lead our work at Birmingham City Council. It's a really exciting appointment, and we're really pleased that she's here with us today, the new Assistant Director for Climate Change, and she's going to address us. So put your hands together. A big Birmingham welcome to Ellie Horwich-Smith, who's going to address you. During the interview, she promised me she's a Villa fan, and I hope she doesn't disappoint me now and unveil that she's a Blue Nose, but that's all I'll say about the football.
What I can say is that I am utterly useless at football. I don't have a particular team, but I'm happy to adopt the Villa, as Birmingham is my also adopted city. So good evening, everyone. It's obviously an absolute delight to be here. It's felt a long time in the coming for me joining the City Council. I haven't actually yet started, so please don't ask me too many difficult questions. I've not quite got my feet under the table quite yet, but I'm starting on a kind of phased start from November. So a little bit about me. I'm a Birmingham resident. I have been for about 15 years now, and I would say Birmingham is very much my adopted home. I have 2 children here. I'm not going anywhere very quickly. So from my perspective, it's really imperative that I support the mission that I have around achieving net zero and doing that in my own space, in my own city. So for me, this is a really exciting opportunity, but I'll be really, really keen to kind of take on board and do what I can to help progress. In terms of my background. So I started out studying environmental management with psychology, and I actually went to university to study psychology. But actually I came out being an advocate for working in the environmental industry. Now, I won't disclose exactly when that was, but it was quite a number of years ago now. And there were very few opportunities actually within the environmental sector. If you didn't want to be in a regulatory sector, actually there were very few limited opportunities. But I was very lucky to join quite a progressive organisation, an SME based within Birmingham, who were supporting a number of energy saving trust programmes. And that's really where my career started, working within the West Midlands with Birmingham, a number of other local authorities, supporting them in their energy efficiency and their fuel poverty ambitions to kind of bring energy efficiency standards up within the domestic sector. So that's where I've started out. And my kind of career has kind of evolved as obviously the opportunities and the nature of people's interest and the technologies have evolved as well. So for me, it's been a really exciting sector to be part of throughout my career, because I've been able to create and mold the opportunities to what I want to achieve out of it and vice versa. So it's a really exciting career to be in, and certainly very exciting to be coming into at this point in obviously the kind of vision that Birmingham and the country has. So I started out in the energy efficiency space. I was developing local authority strategies. I was involved in the first climate change strategy actually in Birmingham. That's a number of years ago now. And then I worked more into supporting asset managers in how to invest and in what in terms of their stock. So that's kind of where my consultancy career, if you like, started out. And then I've moved more towards in the heat decarbonisation space. So for the last 6 or 7 years, I've been specifically focusing on energy infrastructure. So helping develop energy networks, particularly around decarbonising heat within buildings, being one of the most tricky things to actually do, because of obviously we've got very kind of wedded to gas, notwithstanding obviously the current changes in the prices. I think it's been a very difficult sector to move away from. So that's where a lot of my focus has been, and I've been working particularly with Solihull Council and also Samwell and to a certain extent with Birmingham over the last 6 or 7 years on those projects. So I would say my 2 areas are predominantly kind of low carbon housing and kind of net zero retrofit, and also the energy infrastructure space. But obviously I'll be absolutely delighted to get involved in all the other aspects that we're going to be looking at. In my spare time, if there is such a thing, I'm also chair of the Sustainable Housing Action Partnership, which is a very well-established group of kind of very passionate individuals working across the industry, looking at helping support both asset managers, the industry itself in terms of the supply chain and the manufacturers, and also the new development space to actually invest in sustainable, affordable and low carbon housing. So that's a kind of organisation that I kind of chair and head up and have been involved in for a number of years. And I do get involved in a number of other kind of advisory panels, including some work with the Green Finance Institute, who are obviously looking at how they can bring finance forward. So I think that's probably more than enough of my resume and an introduction, but hopefully it's given you a flavour of my background and obviously my passion to be in the sector, and obviously I'm very excited to be able to start proper come January. But thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ellie. I'm sure Ellie will get around to, when she does formally start with the council, to meet many of you who've been involved in this journey with us thus far. So today's session, we want to focus on 2 particular issues. We're shortly going to have some presentations on the work that the council and the university have been doing around cleaning up the air in Birmingham. But the key question is not what we've done, is what more we need to do. I've always said, and we at the council have always said, that the launch of the Clean Air Zone is a start of the journey to ensure that every single neighbourhood in Birmingham has not just legal levels of clean air, but safe levels of clean air. So it's the conversation will be about where we need to go next on our campaign to clean up the air in the city. So shortly we'll be hearing from William Bloss, Professor William Bloss at the university, and then Steve Arnold at Birmingham City Council, the head of the Clean Air Zone team. And then we will also have a presentation on some of the work we did with the Emergency Birmingham Transport Plan. The transport plan itself is going to Cabinet next Tuesday. Hopefully it'll get agreed and adopted. We've had quite some coverage. I wasn't expecting to get emails from people in New York. Brummy's living in New York, telling me how wonderful this is. And this morning I had to do some media from some media with colleagues in the States too. So there's been a lot of positive news about the Birmingham Transport Plan. It's been adopted. It will be adopted next week, and it's certainly got people talking. There's a lot of people who are supportive, and there's some quite challenging, some of the ideas within that too. So we'll be hearing from Phil Edwards, the Assistant Director for Transport and Connectivity, and Mel Jones, a Senior Officer in the Transport team, about some of the work we've been doing about that. And then there'll be an opportunity to have some group discussions about what more we need to do, what people feel about the Emergency Transport Plan and the Birmingham Transport Plan, and how we can take that piece of work to another level. So that will get us through today's session. So moving forward, we want to focus on particular things. So today's the theme really is transport and clean air, but in future community assemblies, we also want to focus on other key aspects. You know, we all remember the 7 key strands of our climate change action plan. We want to give updates, but we also need to have some challenge of all the different partners, particularly the local authority, on how we can do more in this area. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Professor William Bloss from the West Midlands Air Project. They're a fantastic initiative. Bill and his team have some of the best monitoring equipment based here at the university. We've got this one of the key super sites based here at the university that is so helpful, and we as a council work very, very closely with Bill and the project, and are regularly getting information about the work that we're doing, whether that's helping or hindering clean air in the city. So Bill, you've got a presentation to take us through, haven't you?
Great. Okay, can you hear me? You can hear me in the room. I'm going to assume people can hear me online as well. Someone's nodded. Brilliant. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. So what I want to do is tell you a little bit about what is happening in our air at the moment, in the air we breathe. Give you a few reflections as to how clean our air is and what the challenges are, and tell you a little bit about the work that the university is doing that's relevant to informing the policies and the opportunities we have. So I just wanted to start off with this question: is our air clean? And I found this quote from then Princess Victoria when she visited the region in 1832. And it wasn't a particularly sort of tourist brochure type statement she came up with, remarking on the desolation, engines flaming, coals in abundance, very much the industrial West Midlands then emerging as one of the sort of key drivers of industry of the world. So there were some challenges, and those sort of came to a peak, I guess, in the UK as a whole, in the London smogs in the 1950s, the pea supers. And the photo shows you the smoke in London in broad daylight. And the caption shows you apparently it was a very busy time for thieves, presumably facilitated by the visibility. But on the back of that, we had legislation, we had the National Clean Air Acts, we moved a lot of power generation and industry out of our cities, and now our skies are blue, at least some of the time when they're not grey. So have we got clean air? We live in a world where people will pay $25.95 plus shipping to buy a cylinder of Rocky Mountain air from Canada and have it shipped over. And we live in a world where we get newspaper headlines like this. So I just want to unpack a bit if the glass is half full or half empty, and if it's filling up or emptying. So that's preamble. The two things that we are focusing on in terms of air pollutants that are harmful to health are nitrogen dioxide gas, or NO2, which is a brownish gas when you've got an awful lot of it, but normally we can't see it in the air, and fine particles, suspended little tiny bits of solid and liquid matter that are small enough to inhale deep into our lungs and into our bloodstream. And if you can make out the picture there, the long grey sort of thing in the middle is a human hair, and the blue circles are PM10s, the bigger particles, and the little red dots are the PM2.5s, the ones that are small enough to enter our bloodstream. So it's all about NO2 and PM2.5. So one of the key questions is, where do they come from? And for NO2 in Birmingham, the overwhelming source is local road traffic, and within that, diesel vehicles, and within that, older diesel vehicles. And if we do some calculations on that, we can split the NO2 sources in an urban environment like Birmingham up into different contributions. The pie chart on the left shows you contributions from local road traffic as the big green chunk, and then the red bit is a little bit of background traffic, and then we have other machinery and industry and things. And if we expand that red chunk out on the right-hand side, you can see the contribution from diesel cars, diesel vans, diesel HGVs and diesel buses, and then petrol cars at the bottom. So the common feature is the word diesel in terms of the local NO2 source. So that's what we need to think about for NO2. If we look at a map of NO2 across the West Midlands, we get something like this. So on the plot here, you can see Birmingham in the middle, you can see Coventry at the bottom right, the Black Country up at the top left. And it looks like a map of the strategic road network. And that reflects the traffic source for NO2. And the levels are lower when we're further away from the roadways. One of the things we've been doing at the university is measuring the variation in NO2 across the city. And the graph here shows you NO2 levels on the y-axis as a function of time of day. And this was data that my colleague Salim Alam collected. And we've got three different colors of line on here. The purple line that's high up is a roadside location. It's data from the Ring Road in the northeast of the city. The red is an urban background site, remote from roads. And the blue is the air quality super site on the university campus. So you can see as we go from midnight through to the morning rush hour, the NO2 levels go up. They drop down again during the day. They rise up again in the afternoon. You can see they rise and fall with the traffic through the day. But the thing that we can really tell from this plot is that the lines are different. So the levels of NO2 are much higher in the roadside than they are in the background or at the university campus. And that tells us that local differences can affect the NO2 levels and can affect the air pollution. If we do something different on the local scale, it will have an impact on the NO2. So the fact that NO2 is different in different places in the city means that things that Birmingham do can change the NO2 level we experience. That's NO2. Jumping back to the key air pollutants, the other one is PM 2.5, the fine particles. And they have a much more complex set of sources. You won't be able to read the words on here, but hopefully the picture shows that there is road transport, but there's also industry, there's agriculture, there's combustion, particularly solid fuel combustion, and a whole range of other activities contributing to fine particles. So while as we've got a transport story for NO2, the challenge is broader for the PM. And if we look at the same sort of picture as we saw before, so how the levels vary by time of day at the same three locations, now the lines overlap. So the levels of PM are much more similar across the region, and we need regional integrated approaches rather than local actions to tackle the challenge. We can see that because they're closer together. So we need to have concerted approaches and to lobby for action nationally to address that. So that's a little bit about air pollution. What I wanted to touch on is the overlap between air quality and climate. So the air pollutants harmful to health are things like NO2 and PM. CO2 isn't harmful to health at the levels we encounter it in the atmosphere, at least at the moment. And the greenhouse gases that are driving the climate change are carbon dioxide and then other molecules like methane and N2O, but particularly CO2. And they have some common sources. So we've talked about transport, we've talked about combustion in power generation, heating domestically and heating in industry, and agricultural sources. And when that combustion is fossil fuel combustion, when we're burning petrol or oil or diesel or coal, then if we tackle that source, we're addressing a cause of climate change and we're addressing air pollution sources. So there's a win-win, there's a co-benefit from actions to address climate, for air pollutants, and for our health. So we can look at that and we can see what that would look like in practice. So this is a map now of changes in NO2 across the region. If you can't make out the scale, which I can believe is the case, the left-hand plot is showing you the absolute difference in NO2, and the right-hand plot, the percentage change, if we were to magically electrify our entire bus fleet and electrify half of the light delivery vehicles on the roads in the region. And if you can't make out the scale, the red here goes from 20 to 39%. So we could get that sort of reduction of our NO2 from electrification of that chunk of the vehicle fleet. And we can see where the benefits would be and which communities would benefit from that. So moving towards those net zero challenges is going to bring an air pollution and hence a health benefit. Just to throw something out to think about for discussion later, we can also think who would benefit from the changes. So this is the West Midlands again. And now the colours are showing you the combination of the air pollution level and the number of people living in particular areas of the city. So it's showing you the sort of burden of air pollution across the population. So you can see the most people with the highest air pollution levels live in the city centres, in Coventry and Birmingham in particular, and you can see some of the conurbations in the Black Country up there, if you can remember your West Midlands geography as well. So that's where we are at the moment. And what we can think about is who would benefit from changes in the air pollution and how that can benefit different communities differently. And I've tried to unpick that a little bit on this next slide. So what you've got is the same map, the West Midlands, showing the change in air pollution exposure. So it's a change now, it's the benefit. The top map shows you what would happen if all wards in the region were to comply with the 10 micrograms level for PM2.5. So that would bring a big change, a big benefit for those city centre communities, particularly in Birmingham and in Coventry, but not much change for a lot of the rest of the region. If we were to reduce average levels of PM2.5 across the region, you'd get the middle plot. So you'd spread out the benefit, but the colours have got lighter, and we're not bringing as big a gain to the communities in some of the city centre locations, which are some of the communities that have some other challenges as well. And then if we bring both of those together, and I've called this ambition, if we have policy ambition, we can make the whole map go dark. We can capture benefits for everyone, and we can benefit the most deprived communities as well. So there's scope to reduce what I call the environmental health inequality from the air pollution policies. Air pollution tends to be really miserable, so I just wanted to show that we are making progress. This is a graph of something called black smoke, literally how much you would darken a piece of paper with air sucked through it. Going from 1955 at the far left through to about 15 years ago now. And hopefully you can see the curve drops down. Our air is a lot cleaner than it used to be. And a lot of the things that we worry about would not register on the dial of air pollution 50 years ago or so. I think it's important to keep that in mind because we can depress ourselves a little bit otherwise. So what we're doing at the university, before I kind of draw this all together, is helping to boost the observational capability for air pollution across the city. We have an activity to measure real-world on-road emissions, which will give data to refine interventions like the clean air zone in the future. We're modelling what's happening and exploring the impacts of policy on air quality and health with those models. And we're thinking about how we can use urban design and green infrastructure to improve air quality locally or to reduce exposure to poor air quality. And through all of this, the university is working with a range of partners, including the City Council and the Combined Authority, to try and make sure that research insight feeds into the policy options that are explored. So I'll just finish off. I think the key points to take away from me for NO2, it's a story of road transport, especially older diesel vehicles, a little bit from other combustion sources. If we're thinking about a 10 to 20 year timescale, electric vehicles can help a lot with that. But there are big questions about affordability and equity there. If we're thinking about PM 2.5, that's the bigger challenge for the future. That's the one that's going to push us over the next few years. And it's a mix of things we need to think about, especially combustion and especially solid fuel combustion domestically and in industry. And that needs coordinated approaches. Air quality and climate, carbon, there are win-wins to be had there, but the scale's a bit different. So to make a difference on global climate change, we need to reduce carbon emissions in Birmingham and in Beijing and in Bermuda. But the local actions that reduce the air pollutant emissions in Birmingham will bring local air quality benefits for local people, irrespective of what happens in Beijing or Bermuda. So there's a slightly different scale to think about. And then finally, communities experience poor air quality differently. And so there's scope to use this big lever called climate and air quality policy to address some of that environmental inequality, if we wish to do so. So that's where I'm going to stop. Hopefully I've thrown out a few things for people to think about, and I look forward to questions later. Thanks.
So I'm Stephen Arnold. I'm the head of Clean Air Zone for Birmingham City Council. So Bill's taken away some of my thunder actually with some of his slides, but he's the expert in this. So I will only touch upon a couple of those. But he's absolutely right. NO2 is the single biggest air pollutant issue that Birmingham has, and the Clean Air Zone is the way in which we're helping to address that, and we're doing that now. But really, the purpose of today is to talk about what more we can do. But what I want to do today is to run through some of the early data that we're seeing from the Clean Air Zone. This is only the beginning of the journey in terms of the data that we're getting access to. And we'll be working really closely with the likes of Bill and his colleagues, but also other partners from across the city as well, to understand what the data is telling us, what other additional insights, what other actions we may need to be taking around not just NO2, but other pollutants such as PM 2.5. So Bill's already spoken about the impact of poor air quality, and the single biggest source is tailpipe emissions for NO2. And it's addressable. It is absolutely addressable, and that's why we've introduced the Clean Air Zone. So Birmingham's Clean Air Zone launched on the 1st of June. It covers an area inside the A4540 middleway. So if you're on the middleway, you will not be charged a fee for entering the Clean Air Zone. But if you come off the middleway, you will. But that is only if you're in a vehicle that does not meet the emission standards for the Clean Air Zone. So that's Euro 6 for diesels, Euro 4 for petrol. But we have introduced a Type D Clean Air Zone. That is the highest level of Clean Air Zone. Other cities are looking at different types of Clean Air Zone to address their local challenges. But for us, it's the Type D, and it covers all categories of vehicles. Daily charge that applies, £8 for cars, taxis, vans, £50 for HGVs, coaches and buses. But we're not the only city introducing a Clean Air Zone. Bath introduced theirs in March, and York introduced a non-chargeable Clean Air Zone earlier in the year. Portsmouth are due to introduce one in the autumn of this year. Bradford, Bristol, Greater Manchester, Sheffield, Newcastle, and other cities will be introducing Clean Air Zones over the next few years. In the main, they're Type C or Type B Clean Air Zones, but Bristol will be introducing a Type B clean air zone. So this is a policy initiative that other cities are adopting to address their local air quality challenges. And London already has an ultra low emission zone. It's not part of the government's clean air zone framework, but operates in a very, very similar way. And they're expanding that area on the 25th of October to encompass a much greater area. Oxford's also looking at a zero emission zone within the very center of its city. And it'll be interesting to see just how that works, but they are already starting to talk about how they can expand that to drive improvements beyond just pure air quality. So with the launch of the Clean Air Zone, we've started to collect data. The next few slides really just talk about some of the volumes in terms of vehicles that we're seeing. We have published a baseline air quality report. We published that at the end of July, and that sets the baseline that we'll be measuring and monitoring improvements in air quality longer term. We'll be measuring that over a reasonable period of time, 6 to 12 months, because that enables us to capture sufficient data, average that out over a period of time so that you get a much more consistent view of what is actually going on over time. But at the beginning of June, the zone became operational, and from the beginning of June to the middle of June, when payments started, we saw a drop in terms of the volume of unique vehicles entering the zone from 100 down to around about 95,000 vehicles. But it's remained reasonably consistent since that period of time. So the volume of unique vehicles entering the zone is kind of holding up. But interestingly, what we have seen since the beginning of June, or since the middle of June, is a steady, consistent rise in the percentage of compliant vehicles entering the zone. That also means that the percentage of non-compliant vehicles entering the zone has reduced over time. To start off with, it was above, I think at the very beginning of June, it was 18%, dropped down to 12%, and has steadily decreased. So it suggests that the Clean Air Zone is starting to have its desired impact. It is discouraging the most polluting vehicles from entering the Clean Air Zone. And what we're also looking at is just how that compliance breaks down across the different categories. So the chart at the top shows how compliance is changing over time for each of the key categories of cars, minibuses, vans, HGVs and coaches. And then the bar at the bottom just gives an indication of how those categories of vehicles make up the overall fleet entering into the Clean Air Zone. So around about 80% of all vehicles are passenger cars, and that is driving the fleet average in terms of compliance. Interestingly, HGVs and buses and coaches have a very high level of compliance, above 90%. And for coaches, it is in fact above 98%, around 99%. So a lot of that is down to the work that the likes of National Express West Midlands did prior to the launch in terms of upgrading its fleet and ensuring that there were no non-compliant vehicles entering the zone. The one area of interest that we have started to look at is with vans. The level of compliance within that category is lower than the overall fleet average, but it is the second biggest category of vehicles. At present, there are no additional support mechanisms that we've got in place for vans. So in order to achieve compliance with the legal limit for nitrogen oxide in the shortest possible time, one of the things we are starting to explore is whether or not there can be additional incentives to this group of vehicle owners to encourage that change and make that happen sooner rather than later. And this slide shows you the comparison between what we'd originally modeled in the business case in terms of compliance versus what we're actually seeing by category. And you can clearly see here with HGVs and coaches in particular, originally we were expecting or modeling compliance to be around about 60%. And in fact, it's above 90%. So that's really positive. We think that the prospect of the Clean Air Zone being introduced has helped to drive some of that behavior change. The next couple of slides really just talk about some of the other things we've already started to see in a couple of, well, in particular with the taxi and hackney carriage community. With the private hire vehicles, we've seen the levels of compliance double for both private hire and hackney carriages. For private hires, that's now at 81% and has continued to increase actually since this data was pulled together earlier in the year. With hackney carriages, the level of compliance has doubled, but it is significantly lower. And we think there are a number of reasons for that within that particular sector, that it has been particularly hard hit by some of the economic challenges of COVID. But again, we are looking at other ways in which we can encourage and support that change, and getting those drivers into compliant vehicles in order to achieve compliance and make the improvements in air quality as quickly as possible. This next slide really just looks at also what's happening with the age profile of those vehicles. The bottom slide looks at 2018. As you can see, there were vehicles in the fleet that were as old as 25 years old. That's now moving to the left. So that's generally an indication of improvement in the fleet, greater compliance, better air quality that's being produced by those vehicles. But the Clean Air Zone really is an enabler of change. Some of the other programs being supported by the Clean Air Zone include an expansion of the city's fast and rapid electric vehicle charging network. There's a strategy in development to also roll out additional electric vehicle charging points. But as Bill said, that brings its own challenges as well. We've also supported the purchase of 20 hydrogen buses, which will come into service in the not too distant future with National Express West Midlands, and we are looking at other opportunities to purchase hydrogen buses. We're also rolling out a scheme for Hackney carriage drivers to try before you buy electric Hackney carriages, to encourage change within that sector. But again, the Clean Air Zone is an enabler of change within the Route to Zero program as well. Some of the benefits that arise from the changes around improvements to the vehicle fleet, but also encouraging people to think about doing something different, use more public transport, walking, cycling. All of those are benefits that arise from the introduction of the Clean Air Zone. I think that was a discussion topic. So do you want me to cover that, or do you want to cover it? I'll cover that, okay. So Bill's already talked about some of the challenges around NO2, but also particulate matter. But I think it was just last week, World Health Organization came out with some guidance around changes to the guidance for the limits for nitrogen dioxide, moving from 40 micrograms per cubic meter down to 10, which presents a number of significant challenges, which Bill's touched on really in his presentation. So really what we'd ask you to consider is the kinds of systemic changes that you believe are likely to be required, and are they achievable, and by what time frame? But what we'd also like you to look at as well as some of the challenges around particulate matter. They are regional in scope versus nitrogen oxide, which can be very localized, very Birmingham focused. But how do we build that broader base of support for change? The Clean Air Zone was not an easy thing to introduce. There were a number of challenges. There was significant opposition. There continues to be opposition, but it is going to make things better for a huge number of people, and it will create a legacy through some of the money that gets generated and is then reinvested in transport-related strategies and policies. But how do we build that base for change? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Thanks. So we're going to go into discussion mode now. And we're going to go into break up into groups, both here at the university and also on the Teams group. So I understand that there's going to be breakout groups that Ellie and Karen will allocate you to, and it will happen it'll happen automatically on the Teams group. I know Ian McLeod and Rose Horseful are online, but can I ask that each group ensures that there's somebody making some rough notes of the discussions, some 2 or 3 key headlines to come out of your discussions. We're also going to break up into, I think, 4 groups here. So I think we've got a group here, a group over here, and if we can have a group around the back there and another group there, and I think we've got 4 scribes that can come around and cover the 4 groups off to have this discussion. So we've launched the Clean Air Zone. Steve's talked about that. We know about the further challenges we've got around air pollution in the city. Bill's very eloquently spoken about that. What do we need to do at the next stages? That is the key question. What are the interventions that not just the council, but the city as a whole need to deliver to ensure that we get to safer levels of air quality in every single neighborhood in this city? So I think it's going to be all go now, yeah? I love how people suddenly jump into breakout groups on the teams. Cool. And we'll reconvene at 7:15. Thank you.
Yes, I'll charge it.
starting to, they'll automatically all line back. Do you want to unmute me on there? Okay, colleagues, those in the room can obviously hear me. I assume those on the Teams meeting can hear me too. Brilliant, thank you. Thank you, that's been a really good set of conversations. I'm sure the scribes from the council here in the room and some of those on the remote groups will have taken down notes that we fed back into ourselves. Really helpful discussions there. So the next and final discussion today will be facilitated by Mel. Mel Jones is a senior officer in the transport team at the council. So Mel's going to go through a presentation on the emergency Birmingham transport plan, which was developed in, I think, 4 days after Grant Shapps' famous Downing Street press conference, and we were able to consult and engage with some key folks in the city and pull that together and deliver a substantial amount within the emergency Birmingham transport plan. And there's some ongoing work. So I'm going to hand over to Mel, who's going to go through a presentation, and then she'll set a task. It's like we're all students, aren't we? She'll set a task, and we'll have breakout rooms again for another half an hour of discussions. Over to you, Mel.
Testing. Can everyone hear me? Good. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mel Jones. I'm Head of Transport Planning and Network Strategy for Birmingham City Council. This is my first face-to-face speaking gig in about 18 months, so apologies if my presentation style is a little rusty. It's easier when you're just hiding behind Teams and you can just read your script direct. So the presentation I'm going to give you this evening is really to sort of set the scene for the second discussion session. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Birmingham Transport Plan, the Emergency Transport Plan, and then the first round of Emergency Active Travel Fund schemes that we delivered in the summer and the autumn of last year. This is, so my disclaimer here is that the Emergency Active Travel Fund schemes is only a small part of the work that we're doing on active travel citywide. We've had a lot of investment through the Birmingham Cycle Revolution. We've got our local cycling and walking infrastructure plans that set sort of the future vision for that. And then active travel in and of itself is only one part of the work that we're doing to transform the city's transport network under the cover of the Birmingham Transport Plan. So it's really just a convenient case study in order to give you a flavour of some of the lessons learned and some of the challenges for this moving forward. So in terms of the policy context, we published our Birmingham Connected Transport Strategy all the way back in 2014. That contained many of the right ingredients, but we recognised a few years later that actually it didn't really respond to the scale of the challenges that we face. We've got ambitious plans for sustainable and inclusive economic growth in the city, more homes, more people, more jobs. That creates more demand for travel, and we knew that we couldn't allow that to continue based on previous mode shares with the dominance of private car. But we've also got a range of other social and environmental objectives. We need a transport system that is more focused on the citizen, that allows people to access services and opportunities and participate in society in a more equitable way. And then, of course, there are challenges around clean air, and of course the climate emergency. So what we really need is a step change in transport investment and provision, and transport behaviour change on a scale that we've not really seen before, hence the Birmingham Transport Plan. So we pulled together a draft Birmingham Transport Plan, we consulted on it late 2019, early 2020, and then the pandemic happened, and we really sort of parked the Birmingham Transport Plan at that point because we had more pressing matters to deal with, and we very quickly, as Wasim said, developed the Emergency Transport Plan. That set out the city's transport response to the pandemic, focusing on active travel, facilitating social distancing and maintaining safe public transport for those that still needed to use it. And it also paved the way for a green, low carbon recovery, started to set out some of the actions needed to avoid a swing back towards private car use as people started travelling again. So under the umbrella of the Emergency Transport Plan, we had funding from the government's Emergency Active Travel Fund, we had funding from the Reopening High Street Safely Fund, and also some of our own funding as well. And we delivered a number of temporary and experimental schemes, the majority of which had an active travel focus. So now here we are, almost 2 years later from drafting the original Birmingham Transport Plan. I'm pleased to say that we feel that the Emergency Transport Plan has now served its purpose, and we're transitioning back to business as usual, or the new usual, or whatever that's going to look like. And as Wasim has already mentioned, that is the final version of the Birmingham Transport Plan entered the public domain yesterday, and with a fair wind will be approved as policy by the Council's Cabinet next Tuesday. So up on the screen there, I won't read it out. That's the vision actually from the Emergency Transport Plan, but it's basically the same vision that was in the draft and the final transport plan, but the words that are highlighted in bold were basically the ones that we added in to put that into the context of the pandemic. In simple terms, the vision is for an integrated transport system that meets the needs of all the users. There's a focus on active travel modes for those shorter journeys and for sort of the first and last mile of journeys made over a longer distance, and then a focus on really high quality public transport for those longer legs of the journey. We know that in our city, around 300,000 trips are made every weekday by car that are less than 1 mile in length. So there's clearly some scope to start to influence those journeys, and that's where active travel really comes into play. Lots of those journeys are focused around things like the school run, or pre-COVID people travelling to pick up transit, so interchanging with bus and rail services for onward journeys. We used to call these big moves, we call them principles now. These are the same, they were the same in the first draft of the transport plan, they were in the Emergency Transport Plan, and they're the same ones that we've stuck with in the final version. I've just tried to set out here a little bit specifically how those big moves, those principles, actually support active travel in this context. So the first one is around reallocating road space, quite simply taking away road space from general traffic to create things like wider footways or segregated cycle infrastructure. So that's how it supports the improvement of the sustainable mode, the active travel mode, but also taking space away from cars makes travel by car relatively less attractive. So you've got a mixture of push and pull factors there. Transforming the city centre is the next one. Again, this is about really a reduction in the dominance of vehicular traffic in the city centre, making an overall more conducive environment for active travel. I mentioned previously about first and last mile. Not all trips go to the city centre, but a significant proportion of trips end up, or pre-COVID ended up in the city centre. And it's about making sure that if people have made those journeys by public transport, they can do that last mile on foot or by bike and get from the train station or the bus stop to their final destination. On a very similar vein, but in a different part of the city, is prioritising active travel in local neighbourhoods. So again, reducing the speed and volume of vehicular traffic, creating places for people. This ties in very much to the whole concept of 15-minute neighbourhoods. So having the city set up in such a way that people don't need to travel very far to access shops, services, education, all of those kind of things. Obviously, transport is part of that, but that also requires those services to be available locally in the first place. And again, it's recognising that the first mile of a lot of journeys that might be taking place over a longer distance and using public transport as well is actually from people's home to pick up the transit network. And we want them to be able to do that using active travel modes where we can, rather than people driving to rail stations and things like that. And then the last principle is actually managing demand through parking measures. So this recognises that people's mode choice decisions are influenced by the price, availability and convenience of parking at trip ends. How that relates back to active travel is very similar to the reallocation of road space, repurposing on-street infrastructure, taking out parking spaces to create widened footways again, or cycle priority, or cycle parking, but also again making travel by car relatively less attractive. So coming on to the Emergency Active Travel Fund, these were the schemes that we delivered under the Emergency Transport Plan last year. I've taken this, as I say, it's a sort of a case study, but this is not the sum total of our plans with regard to active travel. The map shows the schemes that were included in our Tranche 1 bid. Most of them got built, most of them are still there, and we're now looking to evolve, improve and make permanent most of these schemes as part of the Active Travel Fund Tranche 2, which we're currently developing and or out to consultation on. All of the schemes used temporary or experimental traffic orders. So an experimental traffic order runs for 18 months with the statutory consultation period that takes place during the first 6 months rather than prior to implementation. But it has to be removed or made permanent once that 18 months is up. But what that does do is give us, it allows us to move much more rapidly in implementing schemes, and it also allows us to make some changes once they're on the ground if we find certain elements are not working. So the schemes included a series of pop-up cycle lanes, as we called them. It is a proper cycle lane, usually provided two-way. Marked with lines, signs, and what we call light segregation. You can see in the top left picture there, those wands that we call them, that actually just help to mark out the cycle lane and protect it from traffic. We also use something called armadillos, which are sort of like a rounded rubber curb that again helps to mark out the cycle lane. So it provides a level of protection for the cyclists from traffic, but it's not as expensive to implement, and it's not as much of a barrier to people with mobility difficulties as a curb would be. We did include some areas of coloured surface treatment. You can see there in the bottom left picture, but that was just focused really at conflict points. Interaction with bus stops is a particular challenge, which we resolved by providing build-outs so that buses can still offer level boarding where people have to cross the cycle lane. I don't have one of those in the picture. I mentioned earlier about the transforming the city centre principle. The city centre segments is one of the schemes that helps to deliver that. So what that does is it divides the city centre up into cells, segments, zones, whatever you want to call them. It's radiating out from the centre a bit like slices of pizza or cake. We install a series of modal filters to make the segment boundaries. So when we say a modal filter, that's sort of a road closure point where pedestrians and cyclists and sometimes buses can go through, but general traffic is prohibited. The idea being then that if people are moving from one segment to the other in a private vehicle, they have to go back out onto the ring road, which helps to reduce that circulating traffic and that rat running within the city centre. So we implemented a number of those initial segments modal filters in tranche 1. There are some more to come in tranche 2. The challenge in the city centre at the moment is there's so much activity taking place on the network. It's about finding the right time to effectively close certain roads, prevent those movements, but still allow some resilience in the transport network while other roads might be closed or dug up, or lots of other things that we're delivering, like metro and major planning redevelopments. So some of the measures didn't work well, particularly the busgate measures, didn't work well in isolation. So we removed them temporarily, but we're not giving up, and we do need to find the right time to come back and revisit those as part of a later phase. We then have the Places for People schemes, which were probably the most controversial thing that we did. Sometimes they're referred to as mini Hollands or low traffic neighbourhoods. We try to call them Places for People because that's really very much the ethos of what we're trying to achieve. Again, that's a series of modal filters, usually delivered with planters. You can see some of those on that middle image at the top there, and then with a bollard in the middle. The bollard locks with a key so that emergency services, refuse collection vehicles and the like can move them if they need to, or if we need to reopen the road in the event of an emergency. And again, the idea is about creating environments that are less dominated by cars, stopping those cut-throughs in residential areas, and create environments that people feel safer walking and cycling. So we delivered about a quarter of a low traffic neighbourhood in King's Heath. We've just started consultation on the full scheme, which covers a much wider area. In Lozells, we have a Places for People scheme, which takes a slightly different approach, using band turns and one-way systems to deliver the reduction in cut-throughs rather than actual closures. And then in Moseley, we had a demonstration project that was just 2 modal filters, which has now been subsumed into the wider King's Heath scheme that we're considering tranche 2. And then in Castlevale and Bourneville, we also had another couple of small-scale demonstration projects, which was just 1 or 2 modal filters, and there's an aspiration to expand those in tranche 2 and other further programmes. Additionally, in local centres, we implemented a series of minor measures to reallocate space, mainly from parking, to allow social distancing, cycling and walking space. And last but by no means least, in the city centre, we created a number of locations where we suspended parking and widened footways so that businesses could benefit and actually have more outside space and have their outside pavement licences. So there's a lot of lessons learned from this. I won't focus on the technical ones particularly, it's more sort of the ideological lessons that we learned. There is absolutely resistance to change, even for relatively soft measures. If you compare the kind of schemes that we were implementing under the Emergency Transport Plan compared to building something like HS2, you know, they're small scale changes, they're very local, but it just goes to show what happens when you start to impact on people's, on the area where people live, and that space that they occupy. I've worked in this game for 20 years. I cut my teeth on consulting on projects like Metro and Bus Showcase. So I knew it wasn't easy, but even I didn't think it would be quite this hard to deliver relatively simple, small scale infrastructure changes. And we've seen really strong, vociferous opposition to some of these changes that are trying to be made for the greater good. And we've seen a real polarity in views as well, with a perception of winners and losers resulting from some of these schemes and the resultant impacts of those. The short timescales present delivery challenges. Never again do I want to have to deliver schemes on the timescales that the government gave us to deliver those schemes last summer. It was extremely challenging and not something that we would want to make standard practice, but we do still need to move at a pace. If 2030 is our aim, we're going to have to get a lot of schemes on the ground. So there's lessons to be learned in terms of council process, governance, procurement that we need to be really slick, but also the amount of time that we're allowing our communities to get their heads around what it is we're doing. And you know, we haven't got a lot of time to get people on board, and we're going to have to deliver a lot more schemes rapidly, not as rapidly as last year, but still quicker than we have done historically. Our citizens have very high expectations in terms of the level of involvement they have in the schemes, in terms of the level of engagement. That presents us with issues in terms of how we resource that, making sure that that is proportionate to the scheme. I haven't put this on the slide, but again, when I was thinking about this, the other thing that we've been challenged on a lot is the level of technical rigour that we put behind these schemes, how much modelling we've done, how much data collection we've done, how we measure the impacts. And again, generally speaking, we would try to keep that in proportion with the level of with the level investment, and we wouldn't normally model the impacts of some of these relatively, you know, minor local measures, but that is the expectation that's coming out of our communities. They want to know that we've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. We do have support for a vision, but it doesn't always translate into support for the actual schemes and projects. We love to say the devil is in the detail. It really is. We've got this sort of maybe slightly motherhood and apple pie version, this utopian future where, you know, fantastic public transport, great environments. Everybody wants that, but they don't want to change their own behaviour. And when they see what that means in terms of, well, that's fine, you want that, that means we need to dig this up, or we need to reallocate this, or we need to close that. That's what they don't want. So the challenge is how we get that buy-in. The feedback always says you've got to improve the alternatives before you make car use harder. I think I've mentioned before, we've got the combination of push and pull factors for things like reallocation of road space and the stuff around the parking measures. But I think there's still very much a perception that people that are switching their behaviour are doing it for the greater good. And actually, we need to make sustainable transport and active travel in this context just the go-to option. It's a complete no-brainer. People should be doing that, not because they think it's the right thing to do, but because it's the easiest, cheapest, quickest, most convenient thing to do. And I say, not make it the obvious choice and not a sacrifice for the greater good. And then finally coming round to the topic in hand, it's that behavioural response which is key. You can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. How do we actually get people to change their travel behaviour? One of the issues that we've had with a lot of these modal filter schemes that we've put in, we want people to change their mode, they're just using a different route instead. And the kind of behavioural response we see early doors might be different over time. So it's getting acceptance that these schemes might need time to bed in, and that we make things worse before we make it better. But then if we are carbon budgeting, do we actually expend some of our carbon budget by having created congestion in order to force people to change their behaviour? So just very quickly, in terms of behaviour change, then I could talk all night about the psychology behind behavioural change. There's lots of different models for this, but in terms of our behavioural responses, when we're trying to change people's travel behaviour, we either want them to travel at a different time, to take a different route, to use a different mode, or to actually think about whether that journey needs to be made at all. And the behavioural response that we're seeing so far, and research that Transport for West Midlands have done, shows that people are willing to retime, they're willing to reroute, they're not willing to reduce, and they're not willing to remode. And it's how we actually start to channel people towards that. And if we're going to build things like low traffic neighbourhoods, there's no point if all of that traffic just moves to the next road over and the next road over and the next road over. We need to translate that into more people walking and cycling. So here's the full question. To meet Birmingham's net zero targets, we need a significant reduction in overall vehicle kilometres travelled. This requires a step change in investment and transport infrastructure with a strong focus on active travel. Hopefully through the Birmingham Transport Plan, we will pick up that side of the bargain. And while there is growing support for what we're trying to achieve through the Route to Zero agenda, delivering even small scale changes on the ground often meets with resistance and strong opposition. Ultimately, if we're going to succeed, this needs to be significant behaviour change by individuals, and we're just not seeing that on the scale required. So how can we get people to actually change the way they travel to, in and around our city? There's your lead in to the next discussion groups, and I really look forward to seeing what sort of things come back. Thank you.
Formulating the delivery plan for the Birmingham Transport Plan. So we will be taking the comments that you've all made this evening and looking over those and using that to inform the exercise. We'll be scheduling another community assembly for climate change in the new year, so spring 2022, and you'll all be invited to join that session. And it just remains for me to say, if you've got any feedback on today and you want to pass that on to Ellie, then that would be much appreciated. Any ideas about how we can make these sessions work differently or better for you? And lastly, just to thank all of you for coming out this evening and wish you a safe journey home. Thank you.